What are we covering in Noise 201? Well, at the end of Noise 101, we kind of show this slide, which is all the federal statutes governing aircraft and airport noise. So when we talk about airport noise, aircraft noise, all of these statutes, some of them are laws, some of them are FAA orders. These are what we're kind of focused on because these are the things that govern it. So on this list, I don't have a typical agenda today. Instead, I'm going to use this as my agenda. So on this list today, here's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the Airport Noise and Capacity Act of 1990. That's a federal law that did some really big things. We're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about Part 36 and Part 91. Part 36 is more when you get an aircraft certified and things that come along with that certification. Part 91 is really more for pilots, general operating rules for pilots we're going to go over. We're also going to talk about Part 161 today. And then finally, we're going to close with FAA Order 1050.1G. The G is for, these letters for updates, and G just came out this past, I think, June, in the last several months. This is essentially the FAA's policy and procedures when implementing NEPA. So these are all the things we're going to talk about today. Exciting stuff. For those of you who don't know, my name is Jeffrey Jackson. I've been in aviation my entire life. So even when I was like a little kid, I was studying aviation. So I'm thinking like this is like all I've ever done, it seems like. So I love this stuff. No offense to anybody in the room, but I always say it's better than banking or crunching numbers all day. It's aircraft, it's airports, it's fun stuff. So even though this is not an exciting topic for some, we're still talking about some pretty big laws and procedures and how we implement these and why we do it. Any questions going into it? Everybody's excited. A lot of smiles. Okay. First, I want to talk about ANCA and Part 36. And then after I do each section, we'll kind of stop for questions. So instead of waiting to the very end, we'll do questions kind of after each section, and I'll kind of prompt you guys. So the first one's ANCA, the Airport Noise Capacity Act of 1990. This is a very big federal law. We essentially had communities and airlines going to Congress and telling them, hey, the communities are trying to tell us we shouldn't or can't fly here or there. Communities were going and saying these aircraft are really loud. This has been going on for probably 2 or 3 decades before this happened with the advent of jet engines, the Boeing 707. If you haven't heard what a Boeing 707 sounds like, it is loud. The original 727-100, original 737-100 and 200. These were some of the aircraft that had, if you took 101, the cigarette-shaped engines. Now we have kind of high bypass, shorter, like cigar-shaped engines, but those longer, thinner engines were very loud, made a lot of disturbances. We even had a few airports around the country just making their own rules and laws. Said, well, here's what we're going to do with this airport. We're going to put in restrictions. We're going to do this and that. So Congress stepped in. Congress put this law in place. And the idea behind the law was it was trying to balance 2 things, both the communities and the airlines who were buying aircraft. So what did it do? It tasked the FAA with establishing a national aviation noise policy. They had public hearings on this policy. One of them was in Chicago. The others were in Seattle and DC. It established 2 federal air regulations. 91 was kind of already there, but it added to it. But essentially what it did was it phased out older, louder aircraft. It told the airlines, you have to phase these aircraft out. These that met stage 1 and 2 requirements, you have to be phased out. But it also made the caveat, this was a one-time thing. This law just covers those aircraft that meet this threshold. It doesn't contemplate years later, we'll have another threshold, we'll get the mandatory phase out. So it gave them a one-time phase out. It also took any existing airports that had a law in place or a rule in place and it grandfathered. So this prevents any airport today putting in new access restrictions, saying, well, the type of aircraft you fly, the time of day you fly, the airline. So a lot of times you get the question, well, why can't we just prevent them or not allow it? The answer is, or penalize it, fine it, whatever. The answer is because there's a federal law that prohibits it. Now, we have a couple airports. You can go out and Google some out there. San Diego and John Wayne Airport in California are 2 very famous ones. they have rules and laws in place that were grandfathered. They were in place before this federal law was put in place, and it was grandfathered. Other thing big about this law, it happened in 1990. I think at the time, a lot of people thought the communities won, so to speak. The communities really got these older aircraft phased out, but as time has gone on, I think some communities kind of feel differently now. We kind of feel like, well, they did it, and they did it for those aircraft. We really wish there was another one. But it's really important when we go to public meetings, we always get, not always, but you get a lot of residents sometimes that say, well, if there's anything we can do, is there nothing we can ever do? I always kind of point back to this and say, well, this is America. You have elected officials in Congress. They've passed laws before. So there's always something you can do. You can always go to your elected official. There's always something to be done. And it shows you how Congress is involved. Part 91, let's go over part 36 too first. Part 36 is our noise standards for aircraft. So think of an aircraft when it gets, a new aircraft becomes certified, it has to go through noise testing, just as your automobile goes through emissions testing, or your automobile goes through some type of noise testing. The aircraft go through it as well. Part 36 keeps track of what we call stages. That's essentially the noise an aircraft makes. They kind of use 3 different readings: an departure profile, an arrival profile, and a sideline profile. All 3 of those numbers kind of go into their noise rating, if you will. And then from there we have stages. Stage 1 and stage 2 were the ones that were phased out. Stage 5 is the latest one. Kind of a weird thing about this stages. It works on what stages are around when an aircraft was certified. So for example, if I have an aircraft that was built or certified in 2010, and stage 5 wasn't in place then, it might get certified as stage 3 or 4. Stage 5 comes about, it doesn't get recertified, it's always stage 3, for example. So even though it may meet stage 5 guidelines, it's really certified when that happens. The reason I bring that up is because we're quite often asked, hey, how about the ANMS reports? How about we list what stage everything is? And it's like, well, it's a little deceiving, because some aircraft are certified at stage 3, but they might meet stage 5, for instance. So that's part 36 and ANCA. This is a part 36 timeline. We have certain aircraft that were really aimed more at commercial aircraft that had phase outs of 1 and 2 quicker than other aircraft. And then we've actually had helicopters had their own regulation about when things had to meet certain certifications. And then we've had stage 4 and 5 come about as well. But this kind of shows you a timeline of those things. And really this timeline and what prompted it is going back to ANCA. One of the things Congress said, FAA, you have to have a policy, you have to have some way of categorizing these things, and you have to keep track of them. Which one of the things ANCA did. What else on ANCA? Any questions on ANCA or part 36?
You had just said that it could be certified like at stage 3, but it might qualify for stage 5. I lost that.
Yeah, I mean, so if an aircraft is certified in stage 1, 2, and 3, the only thing that exists, and stage 3 it meets, and then later throughout time, they come up with stage 4 and stage 5, they don't go back and say, okay, well, that's really a stage 5 because it meets stage 5 standards. It's left at stage 3. So if it makes sense, you actually have some aircraft that might be stage 4 or 5 that are louder than a stage 3, only because when they're certified and what stages were present at the time. What this does is these stages really give the FAA a framework. I mean, there might be a stage 6 and 7 and 8 one day, I don't know, you know, that'll come about. It kind of gives them a framework of building these stages. What it doesn't do is phase anything else out other than stage 1 or 2. When the Noise Commission was founded, one of the first tasks the Noise Commission was doing was tracking these aircraft, because when this law was passed in 1990, you had a lot of airlines that said, we can't meet this phase out, which happened in 2000. They had 10 years. We can't phase all these aircraft out, so we're gonna put in waivers for exemptions to Congress. And one of the first things the Noise Commission did was they started sending a bunch of, you know, very, I'm not gonna say polite, but I don't wanna say mean either, but very direct letters to the airlines and to their Congress members to say, hey, if these airlines say they can't meet it, like you don't need to accept their application for a waiver, you need to enforce it. This is a law, you need to enforce it. So the O'Hare Noise Commission put forth a really big campaign with the congressmen and even the airlines that say, hey, airline, this is a federal law, you must comply. And hey, Mr. or Miss Congresswoman, if they ask for an exemption, don't give it to them, because this is a big issue here. So tracking it, these airlines had to do a report to Congress. It got pretty detailed for a while. But once those stage 1 and 2 were phased out, there's no other phase out. There's no other mandatory phase out this time. That would require a brand new law. Okay, Part 91. Let's kind of go over that a little bit. So Part 91, so I got my pilot's license when I was younger, and my flight instructor always told me Part 91 is like the common sense rules for pilots. You know, it says, hey, when if you're gonna fly, make sure you have your license with you. Hey, when you fly, you need to listen to air traffic control. Hey, you don't need to fly recklessly. Hey, you can't be drunk or impaired when you're flying. All the basic stuff. You need to do a pre-flight checklist for the flight before you do it. All the basic things that have a pilot, what they do is found in Part 91. So when ANCA happened, they said, well, let's update Part 91. Let's add to it about noise. So they made sure they put in here that there were limits, so pilots even know. It's not just on the airline, but pilots know that, hey, stage 1 airliners, they're phased out, stage 2's phased out. So they even put this in place for pilots to be aware of, instead of just saying, well, we're just gonna rely on the airline to do it. So even pilots are aware of this. So they updated Part 91 as well. So Part 36 is more the aircraft certification. Part 91 is really more for pilots.
Jeff, when you say planes are phased out, does that mean that they're not in the air anymore, or they're just not in passenger service?
So those aircraft are not in service, at least anywhere in the United States. There could be some third world country, but in most cases they're not. In a couple of cases, they re-engined them. Hush kitting was big then. There was like a little patch, if you will, in the back of the aircraft that essentially took the threshold from not meeting the threshold to just barely meeting the threshold that some airliners did, but all those were phased out as well, mainly because of fuel efficiency over time. They just, 9/11 happened only a year after the phase out, or a year and a half after the mandatory phase out. So the airliners that had put in the hush kits thought, well, we might be able to get by for a while on this. After 9/11 happened, some fuel prices went up and they kind of got rid of most of those aircraft. So in some rare cases, there could be a re-engine, but not by commercial aircraft. Maybe somebody has a private one or something, but in 99.9% of the cases, these aircraft aren't there anymore. So Part 161, this is something else that ANCA created. It was on my earlier slide about ANCA. It created it because it said, well, we can't do these things. And some airports pushed back and they said, ever? We're just completely prohibited from ever doing this? And so they came up with they tasked the FAA with coming up with a section that would apply to an airport if they wanted to put in some type of restriction. So let's go over it. Part 161, so this was newly created after ANCA, was a notice and approval for airport noise and access to the airport for aircraft restrictions. So let's talk about it. So there's 6 conditions that have to happen that are very onerous conditions. We've had, I think the last I heard, 7 airports was the last count I had that have tried to do this. We've yet to have a single airport go through the entire process. And they get stuck with these 6 conditions. They get stuck on the cost-benefit analysis. So what the FAA said you have to do, you have to show the benefit of preventing an access restriction in. So meaning an aircraft, an airline, time of day, whatever. You want to restrict that interstate commerce to this airport, then you must be able to express in dollars compared to the cost of what's associated to implement it. So what did that aircraft cost to implement this, or you lose? And then how would the benefits be described? So in other words, if that aircraft came in, I'm making up numbers, and it was going to contribute $30 million to the economy, show us how you could save that $30 million was benefited in the communities. And so that's where all airports that have tried to do this have really gotten tripped up. The noise benefits such as improvements in quality of life, has to be expressed in dollars compared to the cost of that flight, fuel, aircraft, everything. DNL, day-night average sound level. We've gone over this in 101. I know you see it in your monthly reports. We talk about it a lot in tech, residential. DNL is the metric of choice. It represents the cumulative exposure to sound. It's a 24-hour time weighted. If you don't have 24 hours, you can't really do it. You want 24 hours. You take the nighttime noise, the 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. You essentially weight that by a factor of 10 dB. That's the intrusive penalty. Think of it as nighttime noise. That's when you're at home sleeping or you're at home watching, TV or doing quality time. Also at night, the ambient outdoor sound tends to be a little quieter. So those factors are why it's used. It's the metric of choice. You have to use it. That's my description of it, but we have a video.
Day-night average sound level, also known as DNL. As the video begins, aircraft are shown flying arrival and departure procedures to and from a major airport in high speed. Green and red trails behind the aircraft show the traveled paths of arrivals and departures, respectively. Each arriving or departing aircraft is continuously transferring energy to the ground in the form of noise. The louder and lower the aircraft, the more noise energy it produces on the ground. The size of the multicolored bubbles surrounding each aircraft correspond to how much noise energy is being transferred to the ground at any given moment. The essence of DNL and all other cumulative noise metrics is to represent the total accumulation of aircraft noise energy over some period of time. If we focus on the pink bullseye on the map, each passing flight transfers some total amount of noise energy to the ground at that location. As the flights pass, the graph on the left shows aircraft noise energy accumulating at that point. The flights that come nearest to the pink bullseye tend to transfer the most noise energy to that location. Over the course of a day, a great deal of aircraft noise energy may accumulate. DNL is different from many cumulative metrics in that it puts an extra emphasis on nighttime flights. Nighttime flights are defined as those happening between 10 o'clock p.m. and 7 o'clock a.m. To account for the extra sensitivity many people have to nighttime flights, the calculation of DNL multiplies the actual noise energy transferred from these flights by 10. In other words, a flight at night counts 10 times as much in the calculation of DNL as a similar flight in the day. This is referred to as the DNL nighttime penalty. At the end of a full 24-hour period, the DNL value can be calculated. To calculate DNL, all the accumulated noise energy from the daytime and the nighttime is added together, including the influence of the nighttime penalty. The total noise energy from the day and the night is then distributed evenly over the entire 24-hour period. With the aircraft noise energy distributed evenly, the result is a single continuous noise level in decibels. This level is the DNL.
We actually did this video for the Transportation Research Board for a study they were doing. We kind of did a series of these videos as a part of a noise research study for them. It was good. The other thing I kind of like about it, it kind of gives you a back of the house if you have any people out there that like math. And if you remember from your high school, logarithmic classes, noise is logarithmic, and we kind of give you a peek behind the curtain there. That's kind of the key if you ever put data into Excel or you want to do it longhand, and you're trying to calculate and add and subtract noise levels. What you can do is convert the logarithmic to a regular integer. That's kind of called energy, if you will. You'll get something in Excel that's a really long number that your mind can't quite wrap your head around, but you can change logarithmic, if you remember from high school, change logarithmic to regular integers, do your traditional math, and then change it back to logarithmic later. So those of you who want to play with, decibel levels in your spare time, adding and subtracting them, that's kind of the way to do it. That kind of gave you a peek into it as well. Just wanted to go over those before, you may have to click back on the screen for me. Before we kind of go over NEPA. So NEPA became law in 1970. It is our National Environmental Policy Act. Some people think it's protection. It's really not protection. It's our Policy Act. It actually requires all federal agencies to integrate the environmental values and review into any big decision-making process being considered. So what does this mean for aviation? And so essentially for aviation, our regulator is the FAA. So essentially this tells us that any major project at an airport, when it goes to the FAA for review, they're tasked, they're the federal agency tasked with reviewing NEPA. So FAA has put forth some policy on that. When they do the review process, it happens typically in these three categories. One is a categorical exclusion, Cat X. This is really, for the most part, a checklist. There are some long form Cat X's that have some words on them, but it's mostly a checklist. It's things that are very minor and don't have any impact to the airport or extremely little. An environmental assessment, which is more rigorous. And then typically if you have an environmental assessment that has impacts, significant impacts that can't be easily mitigated, things escalate to an environmental impact statement. Both EAs and EISs have been done at O'Hare in the past. So these are really the three categories that you see in NEPA. NEPA tends to shift and change some, and so the FAA's policy has to do it. Depending on presidential administrations, you might be told to spend more time on a certain subject or address certain things in NEPA than others, so federal agencies have to comply. Other presidential administrations may say, do not spend time on this topic or that topic, or less time on certain topics. And so those things will change over time depending on presidential administrations that go on. This past EA that was done in Chicago for O'Hare, the Tappan Air Traffic EA, the vast majority of the projects in that project, in that proposal, were buildings being done at the airport. There were some air traffic things that happened, but all of the public comments that came in, almost all of them had to do with noise. So even when you have projects that aren't really as noise specific, the comments from public tend to be about noise. So noise is a very big topic in the airport world, typically one of the largest, if not always, the largest section of NEPA for airports anyway. So FAA put forth, got it, so I didn't put it on this slide. So this is going back to that first slide, the FAA order. So FAA order 1050.1G is the order that the FAA has that describes their policy and procedures on noise, how it's to be assessed. It gives details on what you need to do, how you need to do it. The letter changes, it just depends, letter changes every few years based on additional guidance. Sometimes that is because of presidential administrations. Other times it's just because the agency has got more details that they want to put in there. Right now we're on G. If you ever go to a public workshop or a public hearing on NEPA and it deals with aviation, here's a pro tip. You can walk up to the FAA, you can walk up to the consultant, and you can say, did you guys follow FAA order 1050.1? And you can use the letter or not. Right now it's G. And I guarantee you the FAA or the consultants there are gonna be like, oh wow, they know what they're talking about. They're familiar with the order. So that's the pro tip. Always remember that order 1050.1. And so if you ever go to a public hearing, or they're about to start, even if it's scoping of a public hearing for NEPA, you can ask them about that order. You could put a comment in, our village or I as a resident, recommend you follow this, exactly in place. You can also ask them, did you do things not in the order? Are the things that you did in the order to do the order, but if there are other things that you did, if so, what did you do? We'll talk a little bit about this, that there's certain things this requires, but I didn't put much in here about, there are a lot of supplemental things that have happened. They might put it in the appendix, but there are other things that they'll do in many cases. So that's something you could ask as well of the federal agency or the consultant or the airport doing the work, is what did you do to follow the order, or did you follow the order, and then what things did you do that aren't in the order that are also in the document. If you do that, I guarantee you they're gonna look at you, they're gonna say, wow, you know your stuff if you ask those questions. But in the order, one of the major things it does is it gives us the threshold for significance. So that word significant means something in aviation noise terms, it means something important. So what does it mean? And here's where I'm gonna read directly from the order, and then we're gonna talk about it. It's exactly word verbatim from the order. It used to be in a different appendix, so if you're familiar with prior versions, I think this was in, I can't remember, but it was a separate table essentially. It's been moved to Appendix A1, so if you're familiar with other past ones, or you've seen this presentation before, it has moved with this version. So the action, so if it's significant, the action would increase noise by DNL 1.5 dB or more for a noise-sensitive area that is exposed to noise at or above DNL 65 dB noise exposure level, or that will be exposed at or above the DNL 65 dB level due to a DNL 1.5 dB or greater increase when compared to the no action alternative for the same time frame. For example, an increase in DNL 65.5 to 67 is considered a significant impact. As is an increase from 63.5, notice that's below the 65 level, to a 65 level, meaning it wasn't gonna be in. So what does that mean? We're gonna talk a little bit about that. It means essentially that if you have something in the proposed action that's 1.5 dB louder than the no action, but in the 65, that it's significant. We're gonna give you an example here in a minute. How do we do this? We do it with the noise models. There used to be an integrated noise model that was used for many years. That was phased out. It's a legacy tool. Now there's what we call ADT, Aviation Environmental Design Tool. That's used for noise, it's used for air, it's used for fuel burn. You remember earlier when we talked about Part 36, that aircraft got certified. When that aircraft got certified, all the standards for that aircraft, the noise standards, they calculated those, they kept those. They take that aircraft, they put it in the noise model. So the noise model is based on operations and aircraft that you put in the model. It's not based on noise monitors. So they take those readings and essentially put it into the noise model. FAA uses the noise model, FAA created the noise model. You must use the noise model. If you ever talk to an airport or a consultant and they say, I've got a better model that we should use, well, that's a bad problem because the FAA is not going to approve it unless you use their model. FAA's Office of Environmental Energy is the one that oversees this model. So how do we do it when we do it? You have to define alternatives when you do this. So you have to have a purpose and need. You have to look at alternatives that meet them. Here's an example of a runway. You have to look at that proposed action on what you want to do. In this particular example, we have a runway. Let's pretend like we wanted to extend the runway and make the runway longer. So that's what our proposed action is. We're taking our old runway, we're extending it. We have to look at, in many cases, a baseline scenario. What's the noise exposure today? We have to look at maybe no action contour, a proposed action contour. Those are the two required, and we might even have an alternative that we have to do. So if we do that, all of a sudden these things kind of add up, right? I've got a table over here. I have an existing baseline. I have a build out, which is in a fictitious year 2028. The no action, proposed, and alternative, that's 3 different noise contours. A lot of times the FAA wants us to look at 5 years out past our build out. Well, that's another 3. And in some cases, they might even want an interim condition done. That's another 3. In this particular scenario, I've got 10 noise contours generated. So these can add up pretty quickly. Other studies might have more alternatives. So the alternatives could start expanding pretty quickly and you can start adding more levels of complexity. You could have long construction times, and some people, like the FAA, might want you to do more interim conditions. So this table can expand in your NEPA document. The noise chapter can get pretty voluminous pretty easily, depending on how many interim conditions, how many alternatives that you have. But at a minimal, you gotta have the no action, and you have to have the proposed action, because that's how we, back here, I thought it was one click. That's how we calculated our significant noise level. So coming back to this table, I've got to have my proposed project and my no action, the 2 middle 2. I've got to look at those, in most cases, the build out plus 5, those top 2 X's on the far right. I have to look at those and I have to compare those two and look in that 65. And are there any 1.5 dB increases? If there are, it's significant. And they have to be mitigated from NEPA, meaning they would have to be sound insulated, acquired, bought out by the airport, something would have to occur. But the purpose of this is to say, well, those two things aren't the only thing always looked at. You do a baseline, you do a build out and a build out +5. We look at interim conditions, and they start expanding quickly. So how do we do it? We have to collect data. This is all the data we collect, airport information. We go out, we get existing airport information from like the master record, where are the runway endpoints at, all the data on the airport we get. We go look at weather data. The weather affects aircraft. We have to pull weather data, temperature and humidity. We go get all these other things, flight tracks, operation levels, types of aircraft that are flying at the airport, runway use, time of day, the aircraft profiles. The same aircraft will have different profiles, climb and descent profiles, depending on where it came from and where it's going. It may be heavier. Same, a 747 going from Chicago to Denver will fly differently than a 747 going from Chicago to Tokyo because of the weight of the aircraft. More fuel, more cargo in many cases. So we go get all this data from places like the ANMS system, and Chicago is a great source of it. We have to make modeled flight tracks. That's always confusing. We have actual flight tracks on the left, and we have these red lines that go on it. We have to create modeled tracks. A model track is not a 1-for-1. A flight track's a 1-for-1. The model track has a different number of operations associated with it. Maybe this aircraft type always used that flight track. Maybe this one didn't. So that's all put into the model. The FAA puts all these profiles, all these aircraft types, they're all in the model. If this aircraft type with that profile, it may make louder or quieter noise, so that's all put into the model. You can kind of see my profile, two different profiles here. You can even have for special airports or special procedures, put in custom profiles. Put in future data, right? This is all about what happened at the current airport. I need future data, right? We may be proposing a runway, or my example, we have a runway extension, right? So you have to put in, that was for existing. So for the future case, I've got to put in what's going to be done. Maybe it's a new runway, new operation levels, right? I'm looking at the future. See that table I put up earlier, the future, what are the operation levels going to be? The FAA publishes a terminal area forecast. You have to go grab that forecast. Once you grab that forecast, you have to say, well, here are the total operations. Which aircraft type's gonna fly. So you have to do a detailed forecast to show by aircraft type to get the number of operations for that future noise level, future operation level. Same thing with time of day, engine types. You go through, there's a data table of all those aircraft types that are going to fly in the future. We took what existing happened with the ANMS system, that could take care of existing conditions, but we need all this future stuff for the future project. We can use fast time simulation. Here's like a little animation. There are models out there that aren't ADT. There are others that are called TAM, AirTop. There's one called Simod. They essentially put in aircraft type and can tell you how an airport would act. So you do this a lot of time in complex airport projects, fast time simulation. You put in the operations, and then that will help tell you if air traffic says, well, they're always gonna take from this gate, this taxiway to get to that runway, you put it through here and you'll see a log jam or a traffic jam going to a taxiway. That gives air traffic enough knowledge to say, yeah, that's gonna be a problem with this future forecast. Maybe they can do it today, but they can't do it in the future. So now all of a sudden we've gotta move some aircraft over to this taxiway and some to this taxiway, and it might even affect runway use. Well, fast time simulation can help us do that. How the airport will react on a busy time frame. Busy day, peak schedules. That data we get, change in runway use, change in taxiway use, that data we get, we bring over to the noise model and put it into ADT. There might be things that have unintended consequences. We have a higher operation level. We don't think the proposed project would change the runway use, but when you put it through here and air traffic goes through it, they say, yeah, now that we kind of look at it and we model it this way, we know that, hey, it does have a problem and it will change runway use. So we take that information, we bring it back to the noise model and put it in. So that's why fast time simulation's used. It's used in non-NEPA contexts too. You're just doing things at the airport wants to know what can make the airport more efficient. If we put a taxiway here or there, it could help in planning exercises. So Fast time simulation is used for a lot of things. So we kind of started with this, but reading directly from the order, the with and without projects, so we have to go back to that. We did all this other stuff, maybe all this other stuff goes into our document, but we have to do what it said earlier to determine if there's significant impacts. And remember that purpose of NEPA, it's to set those significant impacts, identify them, and is there a mitigation associated with them? So my original proposal was we had an airport and we had an extension. We did the 65, 70, and 75 DNL for it. Here's the with project. We've got the runway extension. So we have a new contour that goes out further. So are there homes? So then you take the two and you compare them. And if you compare them, here they are on the impact analysis. You have both 65s on the same map. And as you can see, the one with the runway extension, the red one, it goes out further. There are homes in that 65 that are potentially, they're newly impacted. They're over a 1.5 dB or greater, so we have 67 homes newly impacted. The ones that are 1.5 dB or greater are 18. So that means we had 18 homes that are 1.5 dB or greater. That means those 1.5 are significantly impacted. So the definition earlier, it has to be 1.5 dB in the 65. That means they're significantly impacted. As a way to leave NEPA and be able to build your project, you have to address those 18 homes. We can't ignore them. We can't not do anything. They have to be mitigated. Mitigated meaning sound insulated. They could be acquired. Don't know of any other things that for noise, but those are the two things that have to be done in order to get out of NEPA and build your project. If the airport said, well, I don't really want to do that, then the FAA would say, well, this isn't approved. Like, we're not going to approve you to build this project from the NEPA standpoint because you didn't address those 18. Those 18 must be mitigated. You also have 67 that are newly impacted.
Right.
Those don't have to be mitigated, but in many cases they're looked at as well, right? You have these 67, what do you want to do with these other 67? You also want to sound insulate them. What do you want to do with them? But the 18 must be addressed, or you can't get out of NEPA, you can't get approval of NEPA. Yes, you get out of NEPA, you can't get an approval of NEPA. If you address the 18, you know, you come up with a plan, then all of a sudden you're kind of at the end of your document, then you can publish a draft. You typically, when you publish the draft, you receive comments. In many cases, there's a workshop, especially if you're changing noise. You do a workshop. You go over everything I just went over in 20 minutes. You go over it in 3 or 4 days, some cases, maybe it's 1 day. A lot of cases are 3 or 4 days. And you have boards up and you take questions. You a lot of times have a court reporter in another room. Some people feel good writing their comments in front of everybody, giving you verbal comments. Some people feel better when they go in a small room with a court reporter. They don't feel like everybody's watching them and they can give comments. They'll take your comment. All these comments have to be, have responses. So once that public workshop and the public time period that you can send comments ends, then you have to respond to all the comments, and then you can kind of put all those typically in another appendix, and all this goes into your document. Now, we kind of went over the noise section quickly. Also, there's all these other NEPA sections that are in there as well are addressed. Like I said, for airports, noise is the one that gets a lot of attention. A lot of these will be in the main chapter. How they created the model, we kind of just went through it, but all the tables that gave you all the answers of this many aircraft type by this runway, this time of day, those are all typically in the appendix 2. All the flight track maps, all the details of, hey, we did fast time simulation and we calculated it this way and that's how we knew this runway versus that runway. All that kind of discussion would be in the back as well. The main document really focused on those significant impacts. It would disclose how many homes or libraries and other things too. It would talk about the interim conditions and baseline, but the highlight of that section is, are there significant impacts? I kind of gave you a pro tip earlier when you go in to ask for the order. Did they follow the order? What's in the order? What's not? You could ask, well, are there other things you did for noise not in the order? And that's where they could say, yeah, we decided to take a look at some supplemental noise metrics. We clearly looked at DNL, but we decided to look at some peak noise levels. We decided to do some counts on number of events above certain thresholds, and that stuff typically makes it in or makes it in the appendix as well. That's a good question you can have. Another question you could say right when you walk in the door, hey, I know I just got here, but do you have any significant noise impacts? If so, how many do you have with the proposed action? And you can ask that. So as soon as you walk in the door, you ask it, they're like, wow, this person knows what they want. They're already asking me the golden question of, are there significant impacts? You could even say, and how are those going to be addressed? Another question you could ask. All those go into that document, eventually gets finalized, and you get a federal document by the FAA. That all covers look like this, but they look similar to these things that ultimately get done. When that happens, that's your kind of final document. You release it back to the public again. So if you gave a comment, you can go back in and read the response to your comment that was given. You can also see everyone else's comments, even if they mailed it in or talked to the court reporter. You can go in and see those comments and the response to those comments as well in the final document. And then after that, the FAA can do a determination. So the final document comes, but the FAA may still make a determination a little bit later. Sometimes that determination comes like a day or two later, sometimes a month or two later. That window changes depending on the complexity of the project. And the FAA may come out and say, we've decided to approve this project, it's approved, but we have requirements. For example, there were 15 homes, or 17, I forget the number, the 17 homes that were significant impact. They must be, mitigated before using your runway extension in the example I gave you, for example. They may have other conditions in there as well in that final document. Once that happens, you're allowed to build your project. Now, you have to have permits, there are other steps, locally that you have, but from a NEPA standpoint, that's your environmental construction permit, if you will. You still need to do regular environmental permits and everything else with a normal construction job. But from NEPA, noise, this is the law that it's used, NEPA, this is the FAA order that's used, and that is the definition of significant impact that you must put in there. All these other things are put in there as well, but that significant impacts to follow that FAA order under NEPA must be conducted. And if you see other things on this regulation list that you want to go over, maybe that's a 301, I don't know. They can always give more input if you say, hey, I'd really like to know more about this or that. Maybe that will help us shape a 301.